How are your portfolios doing? Hey there, name's Alex, and I'm no economist, but I'm also not an expert on foreign trade. If I was, I probably would have been better prepared, and I would not have been watching the events in the markets unfold in shock and awe as a lot of other people. Everyone except Warren Buffett, probably, who seems to have been the best prepared with a strong cash position for to weather the storm. Everyone else got severely hit by the tariff shock. Me in particular, the markets were literally breaking my balls. I do believe when all of this is done that Warren Buffett is going to come out of this as the richest man on earth, probably even richer than Musk and all the rest of them. And I think he's just in it for the thrill of the game at this point. I mean, the guy's in his 90s. He's ancient. What's he going to do? I think it's just a matter of excitement and thrill for him. But for a lot of other people, including the very rich, they have lost a lot of money in the recent market shocks and crashes. Imagine if you have $100 billion and one day you wake up and your investments are now down by 6%, and all of your assets, all of your net worth and your wealth is in the stock market and in assets. And you wake up and they're 6% down and you suddenly lost $6 billion. That's more than some countries' GDP, probably. I haven't looked it up. Probably there are some countries with a GDP of less than 6 billion, and that's more, yeah. And all of that is because some guy in the White House decides to slap a bunch of tariffs on everything and everyone and in the world and their mother, leading to assets being on sale. And now those millennial and Zoomer kids can just come and buy up all the stocks that you panic sold on the cheap, if this is their first entry into the investment market. And you're out there yelling, "You dang kids, get off my investment lawn!" Like the boomer that you are. Because let's face it, if you're that rich, you're probably an old boomer. What happened? Yeah, some guy in the White House did decide to slap tariffs on the whole world. In this video, I'm going to try to talk about what tariffs are and explain how they could or how they are supposed to work or intended to work. First of all, a tariff is not paid by the country that it's imposed on. A tariff on a good, a product, a resource, or a service is paid by the consumers buying said goods from abroad, importing them from other countries which tariffs are placed on by their home country. And it's paid to the government of their home country. A tariff is therefore a tax. Essentially, a government says it's going to when a government says it's going to tariff certain imports, it means that it's going to be taxing that import. A tariff is a tax, and I adhere to the idea that all taxation is theft. But if you're not like me and you're a statist and you don't believe that taxation is theft, but rather that taxes are the price we pay to live in a civilized society, you really don't have a moral basis to be against tariffs on principle. Your government decides to put tariffs on imports, and there you have it. Tariffs are now added to the cost, and they're part of the price you pay to live in a civilized society. Deal with it. If you don't agree that taxation is theft, you have no leg to stand on arguing against tariffs. Me, besides believing that all taxation is theft, I also tend to be in favor of a more free trade globally and think specialization is a good thing. But why would a government decide to use tariffs as a tool? There can be several reasons. Let's say a government wants to stimulate the growth of a domestic industry. Say you live in the US and you want a thing. You can buy that thing from China and have it delivered to you for $1,000. The same thing is also made in the US, but it costs $1,200. You choose to buy the cheap stuff from China because it's cheaper. You save money. Here's where we need to make an important note that when we're talking about buying the same thing, is that there really aren't two identical goods. No two products are of identical quality. We're not even talking about comparing apples to apples or apples to oranges here. Even two apples are not the same. And that's just not just with Apple. Imagine, for example, stainless steel. Since I'm an engineer, I'm going to be talking about steel. Let's say that the standard for a grade of stainless steel calls for between 11 and 13% of chromium content in the alloy mixture. That means that the variation of chromium content from batch to batch can be as much as 2%, and both batches would still fit the criteria for this same stainless steel grade according to the governing standards. And that can have major impacts on things like corrosion resistance at high temperatures. And all of that is still within the same grade of stainless steel. Just keep that in mind when we talk about the same or identical goods, that there really is no such thing. No two goods are the same. When we talk about identical goods, we mean similar, close enough, substitute, or alternative goods. And here I'm going to quote Thomas Sowell, that there aren't really solutions, but just alternatives or substitutes. Now let's get back to the thing we wanted to buy from China at $1,000. The same thing in if we want it made in the US, it is made in the US, but it will cost us $1,200. The government, however, wants the domestic industry making the thing to grow and expand, and would really like the thing to be bought domestically by the consumer base, by the people of the country. One way to nudge the consumers in that directions, is to impose a 25% tariffs of that thing coming from China. And now it costs you $1,250 to buy the thing from China, whereas the local thing only costs $1,200. And if you want to buy the cheap stuff, then the US made option is now the way to go, because as we impose tariffs on Chinese imports of that thing, the US made thing is now cheaper. There are, of course, some assumptions that go into this. You assume that you already have the capacity to produce this thing locally, you already produce it, and that you might be able to expand that capacity in short duration and not, let's say, over a period of 3 to 5 years. This is why usually tariffs are implemented initially in very small percentages and with forewarning and information ahead of time that these percentages, these tariffs, will be incrementally ramped up over a period of half a year or a year, and that's stated in advance when tariffs are first imposed. You don't just go slapping a 50% tariffs on something all at once. You don't also impose tariffs on things like, let's say, coffee or bananas if you happen to live in Norway, for example, because you probably aren't going to grow coffee and bananas in Norway. That's just not going to happen due to geographic and climate constraints. You could probably impose tariffs on imports of coal and aluminum, but if your country doesn't have deposits of coal and aluminum that you can exploit, or that you can increase the exploitation of, in that case, you're just going to end up forcing your industries and consumers to end up paying a premium to import those raw materials. Let's take Iceland, for example, that Iceland has access to cheap geothermal energy, and for that reason is a prime destination for smelting aluminum ore, but it doesn't mine aluminum ore locally, so it has to import aluminum ore. And if the Icelandic government were to impose a tariff on aluminum ore imports, that would just be penalizing the metallurgical industry of the country with added taxation, making the produced aluminium more expensive, essentially shooting themselves and their industry in the foot. And that's what you do when you impose tariffs on resources that your economy and the industry uses, you're just adding additional cost to the consumers buying the products of that industry. But if we magically live in a world where all enacted policies only have their intended effects and results and never any unforeseen or undesired consequences and results, imposing tariffs on imports could in fact boost your own domestic industry, leading it to increase capacity, maybe hiring more people, increasing GDP, and through the efficiency benefit of economies of scale, potentially even drive down the cost of the products of that industry. But that's just in the ideal case. And if anyone still prefers to buy stuff from China, even though we slap tariffs on Chinese imports, making them more expensive, well, then they get to pay the premium for that preference, preferring to still buy stuff from China in the form of the tariffs that we've imposed. And those tariffs will be collected by the government, which the revenue from collecting tariffs, the government may then use to enact policies that may be favorable to your own domestic industries, like subsidizing them themselves. And how did China even get to make all of its stuff locally in the first place, and to export everything under the sun to everyone? How much of that is due to cheap, potentially even in some locations, slave labor, or of government subsidies to certain industries, essentially resulting in what can be termed as price dumping against the industries of the countries that China exports to? Well, how about that? What can you say? Well, China already does that. Another reason why you might want to use tariffs as a tool is if you really don't like China, what they're doing, their labor policies, their labor laws, the way they subsidize industries, or their foreign relation and trading practices, and so on. In fact, you might say that China really isn't your buddy, it's not your pal or your guy. Matter of fact, you may view China as an adversary, a rival, or maybe even a threat. You may be wary of Chinese spies infiltrating your own businesses, industries, academia, and even your government. You view them as a threat, an existential threat, and potentially they may start wars against your allies that you might not approve of. You don't want to support their economy through trade by buying their stuff, and that's why you might want to steer your citizens away from buying Chinese products. Let's say that also, besides China making a thing for $1,000 that your people buy, there's also Taiwan, who can sell the thing for $1,100, and also Japan, who can sell the thing for $1,150. And they're both making the thing themselves, and they're not just buying it from China and reselling it to you. Unlike China, Taiwan and Japan happen to be your guy, your buddy, and your pal, maybe even more than friends, allies, strategic partners. And guess what? They also happen to not like China, and so they may be wary of China and want to stick it to them. So, what does the US government do in this example? Well, it can slap a 20% tariff on Chinese goods, and now importing the same things from Japan or Taiwan would be cheaper than buying it from China. And then your consumer base can choose whether they want to buy the cheaper Taiwanese or the slightly less cheap Japanese good. And anyone who still wants to pay for the most expensive now Chinese good out of the other two options gets to pay the premium for that preference in the form of the tariff that the government collects, and can then use that revenue to support enacting policies to combat things like exploitative labor practices or price dumping practices in international trade around the world. Another reason why you might want to use tariffs is in a sort of carrot and stick approach to international relations. Let's say that Your country has been attacked by murderous, violent, vicious terrorists. You're outraged, you're out for revenge, you want blood, so you call upon all your allies and other friendly nations to form a coalition of the willing to go and hunt the terrorists wherever they may be hiding and operating out of around the world. You find out one country where they're hiding, the country harboring the terrorists, and with the backing of your coalition of the willing, your allies, you go find the terrorist hiding in that country, and you bomb the shit out of him, and impose a more favorable government, and you kick the terrorists out of there. But then you find out the terrorists are now hiding in another country. You want to go invade that country, but now some of the countries in your coalition of the willing aren't as willing anymore. So here's what you can do to push your allies towards seeing things your way. You might impose tariffs on imports from them, so until they decide to see things your way and continue following along with your crusade against the evil terrorists. Here's where consumers can also play a role in this too, by voting with their wallets and decide themselves that if country X, like France and Germany in the historic example that I'm referencing, if they don't go along with the war on terror, your customers might decide to no longer want to buy French or German products or goods. Or in the most recent case of Canada, where Canadians were outraged by Donald Trump imposing tariffs on on their country's exports to the United States. Well, what the Canadians did is decide they want to stop buying American goods, like, for example, alcohol. And that has cost companies like Jack Daniels billions worth of lost revenues from sales daily as a result of Canadians not buying Jack Daniels or other Canadian or other American alcohol and other goods that Canada has local alternatives for. And the result is that American goods, like bottles of Jack, have been staying on shelves in stores unbought, unsold, or even pulled out of shelves because it stayed there too long and no one was buying it. This is a way that consumers can vote with their wallets and how consumer boycotts could work. Those are just a few examples of how a government might want to use tariffs as leverage or to achieve certain economic or geopolitical goals. But they are usually used more sparingly and in a more targeted and specific manner, and not with such a broad strokes of the brush like President Donald Trump has used them. This is actually the nuclear approach to killing a fly. Trump's tariffs aren't even as much a response to tariffs that other countries have imposed on imports from the US, but rather it's a way to hunt or pursue uh, countries that have trade surplus with the US. The US has a net trade deficit with the rest of the world in close to $1 trillion. That's how much worth of goods the U.S. imports from other countries around the world than it exports to other countries, and that's not really something to warrant starting a trade war over. And putting tariffs on a pair of islands that are inhabited solely by penguins is not really going to do a lot for the American tailoring industry producing tuxedos. And I really am not a supporter of this tariff approach by Donald Trump and hope he sees the light and steers away from this course of just tariffing the whole world and everyone and their mother. Anyway, that's all I had to say for this video. I've been Alex. I've not been an economist, nor a foreign trade or tariffs expert. If you like this video, if you've liked what I said, give it a thumbs up. If you have anything to say in the comments, like telling me how the tariffs are the best thing ever to happen to the US economy and trade in the world in general, drop me a comment below explaining me why you think that. And also subscribe to the channel. There will be more videos in the future. And if you want to support the channel, there will be links in the description to do so. And I've been Alex. See you next time. Bye.